This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are here in the studio. In fact, I just got done doing a 3-camera shoot here in our studio in Colorado for some of my prediction videos that I always do. Normally, I would do those for the Consumer Electronics Show. CES this year is virtual, but we will still be putting out my annual predictions for that year. So this will be the 2021 predictions of major disruptions, innovations, thoughts about changes. Now I've been doing these videos for probably over a decade and a half. So you can actually go back and go over to hp.com and you can search for them on their YouTube channel. You can also search for them over at Cable Labs, where I'm the CEO today at. So I've just kept up the whole preparing the prediction videos, and you may want to check those out and see. Somebody actually did one time go all the way back through all of those YouTube videos and tried to calculate out my accuracy, and it's not too bad, but it's not really about how accurate the prediction is. It's more about a thought or mental exercise. And also, hopefully, it spurs you to think maybe a little bit differently about the future. And look, we're all rushing to get the heck out of 2020. It's been an unbelievably crazy year. But we want, I use these really as the kind of thought exercises for myself, but also thought exercises for you. So today's topic for the show is a little bit of an extension of a show I did a couple of weeks ago, and I did one where I talked about how did I build up my innovation self-confidence. So what was my work experience like? What were the things that kind of laid the foundation that allowed me to have that confidence to think about really innovation as a career, not just a skill set, but really to commit the last 25, 30 years of my life just being wholly all in on innovation and creativity. So I shared, and that was really laid as a foundation based on really some early jobs. My first, what I would call real first job, was Anchor Industries in Evansville, Indiana, owned by the Dawes family. Can't speak highly enough about them. And also, if you're interested in big circus tents, canvas products, awnings, check them out, Anchor Industries. The second one was my second job, which was Deltac, which was basically technology training. I was hired in by Bob Davis, who is my first mentor. If you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you've heard the whole Bob Davis storyline. Bob Davis, Roxy Westfall, Peter Dignan, Bob King, Ron Califf. There's a whole cadre. Mark Battaglia. There's a whole cadre of people that I met and who I still have stayed in contact with after all of these years. But that's really where I had my first management position. I was hired in, then I was a manager, and I was having to, put together job descriptions and hire people onto a team, and all of that. So those two jobs kind of laid the foundation. And if you want to understand why and how those leaders inspired me, because you could use those same techniques with your own staff, particularly staff that are younger. And how do you motivate and how do you prepare them for a career? Not just that they will work for you. I think about every person who's ever worked for me, not about how do I keep them to stay at the job. Yeah, you want to do that because you're making an investment. But I tell you, I have gotten so much in return when I think about staff and investing in them, in preparing them for wherever their career takes them. It may not be where we're at today. It may take them in a completely different direction. but the return, the contacts, I've got interns who have done and become absolutely amazing leaders in their own right. And the relationships and the ability to call them up and them calling me and just staying in the loop and helping each other out. Those things are invaluable. So invest in your teams, invest in your individuals, not about what you're going to get back from them in the current job. Invest to help them in a long-term career. So today's topic is around entrepreneurship. So I've done, Anchor Industries. It was probably 200 employees when I was there. It's over 350 now, from what I understand. And Deltec was probably in the same realm. And I always thought those were this absolutely huge companies, right? Most I've worked at is a bowling alley. Prior to that, I worked high school and college part time in the evenings at a bowling alley, right? That's how I made money to pay for my college. There was no scholarship, and where I grew up, my family, my parents didn't have the money to pay for me to go to college. So I worked literally 40 hours a week and carried a class load. So how did I learn about entrepreneurship? Well, how did I learn about entrepreneurship was really around, going to and learning and understanding that there's a different set of skill sets about being an entrepreneur. It's about having an idea, being assertive. You got to have a certain amount of skills. You got to have some knowledge. You have to provide some leadership, and you have to have a strategy. How am I going to make this happen? What do I do first? What do I do second? And I quickly realized, albeit I was intrigued coming off of my Deltec experience of having being on a management rotation where I tried all the different jobs inside of an organization. I really liked that, but I knew that I wasn't ready to go right out and pluck down my own money and do that. And so what I did was I went to another company. I went to a company called Individual Software. Now, what happened was Bob Davis, who hired me at Deltec, he went to Individual Software in Silicon Valley and then turned around and hired me. And that's how I ended up in Silicon Valley. Now, Individual Software, small company. At this time, less than 20 employees. It had been around for a couple of years. Joel Hendrickson was the founder. Joel's still there. He's the CEO, still at Individual Software. But I came in, so I didn't have to do the startup. I didn't have to go pitch the initial idea. I didn't have to go raise the money, but I learned how to work inside of a startup. And inside of a startup, you do everything. If it requires you go out and pick up lunch for everybody, sweep the floors. In my case, I was designing and building a products. The big product that I worked on at Individual and did the design and the coding on was a product called Typing Instructor. You can still buy it. You can go to Individual Software. You can go to Best Buy. This product is still available. Not based on my same code, but the concept of the product, which we built, I'm going to say back, this is 1984, is still the fundamental behind that product, and it's sold millions and millions of copies. But what I learned there is look, we all sold. If we're going to be at a weekend show in San Francisco or something down in the convention center in Silicon Valley, everybody was there. You were a salesman. Then you came back, you duplicated discs, and you boxed them and you shipped them. Now you were the shipping department. Some customer called in with a problem. Now you were customer care. You literally recognize in a startup environment, you are doing everything. So if you're an innovator, don't get yourself in the habit of thinking, oh, I can just be the idea person. I can just sit back and do ideas. No, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you literally do everything. And in my, and the kind of the philosophy I have is I always wanted to do everything. I want to have that entire experience. What I learned at Deltec, where I spent 6 months in sales and 6 months in marketing and 6 months in finance, and I had this rotation to learn every position inside of an organization. I love that. I love being involved and engaged in a number of different areas, and that's what really ignited me on the entrepreneurship. So an individual, what I learned was how to, what does it take to really keep a small operation going But I didn't have to come up with the original idea. I didn't have to go raise the money. I did my job, but I kept my eyes open and I used it along a strategy to kind of flesh out the skills I knew I did not have. And individual software did a great job of preparing me for that part of it. Now, I also recognize that at a certain part with individual software, there was skills I needed to learn that I was not going to learn there. So I was there for a little while, and then I went off to the next position. And again, part of this is having a plan, not just waiting for something to actually happen. Have a plan. So when we come back from this commercial break, I'm going to let you in on step 2 of my plan on how I learned to be an entrepreneur. Well, welcome back to Kill Innovations. Let's continue the conversation. What I'm sharing with you today on today's show is about how I learned to be an entrepreneur. Now, I did a whole bunch of startups before I got my first, what I would call big win, which was being part of the founding part of a team, growing that business, taking it public through an IPO, having founder shares, cashing those shares out, and establishing a financial base on which I could build the rest of my career off of. But the key being is knowing all of the skill sets that you need to be a successful entrepreneur. And for me, I realized that I was going to have to go to multiple jobs across the career to learn the different pieces. Now, as I talked about in the last segment, what I learned at individual software was how to be part of a team, how to be part of a small operation, kind of watch the process, see how Joel, as the CEO, how he ran the business, how he thought about it. Now, Joel he was formerly a senior executive at Varian, which was a big company in Silicon Valley. They developed the machines that go into semiconductor factories. And that's where Joel came from. He took his retirement and he believed in the early 80s that training around this new, whizzy, kind of interesting new technology called a PC would be a big market. Individual Software was probably one of the first companies out there to build computer-based training for the PC market segment. And he's had a long run of it. Individual is still there. I think they're headquartered now in Livermore, maybe Pleasanton, but out in the East Bay of Silicon Valley. In fact, I just looked them up just to make sure they were still around. They still are. But I went there to learn how to be part of a team in a small organization, and you recognize that you have to literally do everything. There's no such thing as kind of sitting back and just having one job. Oh, I'm just software, and I'm just customer care, and I'm just sales. You do everything. So what was the skill that I didn't have though? And that was literally getting something up out of the dirt. Nothing, nothing scratched out on a piece of paper. How do you take it up out of the dirt? Now, the next position I took was with an organization called Corporate Resource Associates. And yes, if you're watching the video, you actually get to see the scanned image of my business card at CRA. Now, what was unique about CRA is that CRA was started by two people I worked with at Deltek, Bob Davis, my mentor, and Roxy Westfall. Now, interestingly enough, actually just this last January, I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and got to actually sit down and spend an hour, 90 minutes or so with Roxy, kind of catching up on everything going on with her and sharing with her about our kids. And now that I have grandkids, right? And we both laughed about how old we are. Now, in the case of Corporate Resource Associates, again, it was a training company. So you kind of see a trend here. Deltek, corporate training, big, typically everything from training on mainframes to, if you're familiar with James Martin on technology training, that was Deltek. Individual software, computer-based training for the PC. Corporate Resource Associates, custom training. So this was all about building training programs for others, for specifically for their organization. Now, in reality, you know, we had like a 1.5 year old daughter. My oldest, who's now a mother herself, she was an infant going into being toddler hood at this point. My wife and I, we both came from very meager means from a family perspective. We had no money, to invest to do a startup. So Bob and Roxy actually started Keep Corporate Resource Associates. I didn't participate in what I would call literally the setting up of the entity or any of that. We had no money to contribute. But soon as they got Corporate Resource Associates set up, then they brought me in. So, and it was myself, and then there's Gary, and it was a whole cadre of people that eventually became CRA. CRA's clients ranged from HP. This was my first, what I would call, engagement with HP, and that was developing the training for the very new first commercial introduction of what was called RISC processors, reduced instruction set computing. HP launched the very first RISC processors called the HP PA, Precision Architecture, for an HP 3000, HP 9000 Spectrum. And we developed all of that training to train the HP people about their product. So this was what we did, was take complex technical information and translate it to be used by salespeople, marketing people, customer support people. Basically taking very, like I said, very, very technical information and making it easily consumable, which also taught me how to communicate. How do you take complex items and concepts and make them very simple so anybody could understand. We also did work for Rome. If you're familiar with Rome, they're the company that invented voicemail, eventually to be acquired by IBM. We did U.S. Navy. We did Security Pacific Bank. If you're from California, that they got acquired by B of A. What I really learned at CRA was assertiveness, standing up. I was still a pretty young person, and people tend to, think you look at you, oh, you don't have enough gray hair, so therefore you must not know anything. So you got to be a little assertive if you're at the younger end of your category. And I also learned about strategy, right? Because as CRA was coming up, it started off in the spare bedroom at Bob's house in Redwood Shores. And eventually we ended over up on El Camino, which is this address. And then eventually we had a whole floor over on Twin Dolphin Drive over in Belmont. So the business grew pretty quick over the first couple of years. And what's that strategy? And how do you think about it? And going with Bob out on sales calls. So for me, having worked for Bob at Deltek, working for Bob at Individual, and now working with both Bob and Roxy and taking the business, which basically was a piece of paper, and actually building it and growing it and watching it really up close. So not being part of the initial start, but being right there at the table and seeing what it took from the founders to literally get it up functional. And then how do you think about resourcing and investment and costs and all those kinds of things? So it was probably the best MBA I could have ever hoped for, was having the privilege of sitting at that table and seeing what it took to get CRA up out of the dirt. So, so CRA, I was there for quite some time. So at this point, I've done Anchor, I've done Deltek, I did individual software, and now I've done CRA. So what's the next step on my path to becoming an entrepreneur? We'll cover that right after this quick commercial break. Welcome back. Today's show is a little bit different, as I talked about at the very beginning. I'm actually doing this standing up, so you're probably seeing my body weaving around. Maybe you hear a little bit more energy. I'm trying this out as an experiment, but it really got done out of practicality, because I just have wrapped up a 3-camera shoot here in the studio in Colorado and didn't want to tear it all down and reconfigure it and put it back. right away. So we're trying this format. We're only using one camera though for the show, given that I'm a one man operation here in the studio. So today we're talking about how I learned to be an entrepreneur, and I did a bunch of startups over my years, both as just early staff to being there at the table when the founders created the firm to starting my own firms up until I had my what I would call my first real big win, my first big success. So as we talked about in the last segment, talked about corporate resource associates. I wasn't what I would call the founder. That was Bob Davis and Roxy Westfall. What I was at the table. I was there watching them. You know, my wife and I were not of financial means to have any, you know, we were struggling to pay rent in Silicon Valley, much less to be able to contribute any kind of cash, and we were still pretty young, and I had done really what I would call three jobs in my entire life. So it wasn't like I was bringing a huge wealth of experience. I made up for it in energy, I guess. If you ask Bob or Roxy these days, why they brought me along on this phenomenal ride. So at CRA, did a lot of work with technology companies like HP, did Intel, did some work for Apple. My one claim to fame is some of my code actually shipped with the 1984 Mac, Rome, etc. And this was a combination of training and also actual development work. I uncovered that I had a pretty good skill set at being able to hide complexity, being able to take something that's complex and make it very simple. And the software that I built was also about, putting a face onto technology that at that time was pretty intimidating. A lot of people were not comfortable with even keyboard skills, much less anything else. And so what was going on is particularly with the work at HP, it was new technology. It wasn't even out, or Apple. It wasn't they hadn't even announced it. I had a prototype Mac on a dining room table in this little one-bedroom apartment in Belmont with a toddler crawling around on the floor, and it's staying up all night trying to get this thing done to make sure to make the ship date for the Macintosh. Um, and so, my skill set, I quickly really liked working in taking concepts and ideas, products and technologies, and turning them into what I would call really commercially successful products. So go from spark to idea to innovation. And that's where, my entrepreneur bug and with regards to this really got taken off. So what did I do? What did I do that kind of got this whole thing started? And that was I went off and started my own company called Millennium Rand. Why Rand? Rand standing for research and development. So Millennium Rand in Sunnyvale. And Millennium Rand's mission was really to help innovators who had maybe that idea and who needed help in turning it into a commercial offering, to make it real. That's what I did at Deltec. They had an idea, didn't have a way to make it. I actually built the entire product myself. Individual software. They had the idea about typing instructor, had no way of understanding all the technical complexities and how to make it work. That's what I did. CRA, same thing. Millennium Rand, I wanted to focus on that as my is what would really got me excited. And so that was basically going in with clients who maybe had a raw idea about something new, a new market, a thing, et cetera, but they didn't have the people or the skill sets or the confidence that someone could take literally something off the back of a napkin and deliver a finished and completed product. And that's where my reputation had gotten built, was being able to, pull 4 all-nighters back to back and do everything from debugging hardware boards to writing embedded apps, burning ROMs, writing user interfaces, etc. Do the whole thing. And that's what we did at Millennium Rand. Had a couple of subcontractors, and eventually ended up with a couple of employees. And we did work for companies like Ashton Tate. If you're familiar, if you've been around long enough, Ashton Tate was had a software product called DBase. It was basically a database software. So think of what you may see now today on Postgres or Ingress on cloud services. That's what Ashton Tate was on the PC. And Ashton Tate had some ideas for new products. Again, taking it from literally scratched out over lunch, a couple of block diagrams on the back of a napkin, and then turn around and come back and deliver a finished product. Mountain Hardware, I did a project for them on what was called disk duplication, and this was the very first volume, duplicator. You put in a whole big stack of 5 1/4 or 3.5 inch floppies. Yes, I know I'm aging myself. And put your master in, hit a button, go away, come back, and it automatically duplicated them. So that included mechanical hardware and media platforms and software. In fact, we launched that product at Comdex show, and I remember being in the back of a today you would call it a small little van, RV van. And we're literally debugging the hardware and finishing the software as we drove from San Francisco to Las Vegas to launch the product. But it was a big success. In fact, it came out quite well. One of my clients for Millennium RAN was a company called ThumbScan, fingerprint biometric devices. Again, this was a very rough, raw concept from two individuals out of the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. They had this idea. They thought, oh, wouldn't this be cool? Could we do this? And they drew it out, but they couldn't build a prototype. They couldn't actually prove it. They had a hypothesis, but they couldn't prove it. And they had secured some venture funding from Frontneck Venture Capital out of Chicago. So I was brought in to basically talk to the two people who had the original idea and then take that back and actually turn around and bring back a fully functional prototype. Now, the problem is the original concept that the two founders came up with would not work. The hypothesis was fundamentally false. However, if you take out the technology hypothesis and think about the market was valid, but we had to come up with an entirely new approach to deliver that. And we did. And the product actually was quite successful. Certain 3-letter government agencies love this product. Fingerprint security for under $1,000 a unit. And this was back in 1986, 87 is when we built this. Now, what really happened is the Frontneck Venture Capital then came to me, right? Because I ended up taking the raw concept and built the product to say, something? We want you. We want you to come and be part of the management team. We'll give you shares, etc. We need you. And they made me an offer I just absolutely could not refuse. So I actually sold Millennium RAN to the employees. It's now referred to as Millennium Partners. But I sold that to the employees to dedicate myself to ThumbScan. And in the process, actually found a company in Silicon Valley that had a security product, talked ThumbScan into acquiring it, called Gordian Systems. I took the Gordian Systems and I built an entirely second product for ThumbScan called PC Boot. And PC Boot went on to win Product of the Year that next year. So I won 2 Product of the Year awards 2 years in a row at Comdex. One for Mountain Hardware and the other one for ThumbScan for PC Boot. And that is revenue from PC Boot allowed ThumbScan to actually complete its biometric product. So for me, that's what really gets me excited. I may not have all the technical expertise to do the original ideas, but helping people go from ideas to delivering the commercial product. And this is what I learned. But there's one more step on my path to learning how to be an entrepreneur, and we're going to cover that when we come back from this break. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to wrap up the topic we're talking about, which was sharing with you the steps I took to learn how to be an entrepreneur. My first couple of jobs, kind of got me hooked on the whole bug of not just being a software engineer, but being what I call a T-shaped individual. An I-shaped individual is someone who's very deep in one area. In my case, software engineering. And in particular, um, a lot of expertise in embedded systems and complex technologies, new processors, new technologies, kind of at the leading edge on those areas. That's where my I shape would have been if I just stayed in software engineering. However, I knew that I just got bitten by the bug that it wasn't just the technology piece, but also understanding all of the other areas. And as I talked before, just prior to this, I had done everything from um, going to a startup, being at the table, watching a startup get launched, to starting my own business, to then joining an entity that's being funded out of venture capital. So I had some experience dealing with venture capital and raising B rounds and C rounds, etc. Um, and then eventually ThumbScan got sold off to Cominvest AB out of Stockholm, Sweden, and I was kind of between gigs. Well, the original founders of ThumbScan, so these are the individuals at the University of Illinois, where I took the concept off of the back of a napkin and turned it into a real product that allowed them to raise money and be quite successful. They recruited me. They had another idea coming out of the university, and this was around supercomputers. And so I was recruited following the sale from ThumbScan to move to Champaign, Illinois, at home of the University of Illinois, to become the president of Terraplex. Now, Terraplex was a supercomputer company that was based on a radically new processing architecture called MISC, or Minimal Instruction Set Computers. You can go to Google, search for MISC, you can see it. You can actually still find some articles about the work we did there. Terraplex was funded initially by the state of Illinois and a couple of high net worth angel investors. I came in as the president, solidified some additional funding. So that was my experience of learning to deal with angel investors. Keep in mind, my experience now covers everything from self-funding out of people's pockets to you fund based on winning consulting deals. So you basically are replowing dollars in, to venture funding, to now angel funding. So Terraplex was where I learned how to raise angel funding and subsequent rounds of angel funding, doing things like convertible debt and all kinds of capital structures in order to fund Terraplex. And Terraplex, I think, was quite successful. We actually, I also went off and secured technology licensing agreements. The one big one that we had was with Atmel out of Silicon Valley. They took a license to the architecture for the MISC processor. We signed a deal. It was made a little bit of noise back in the day. Business Week wrote a big article about it. So that's also where I learned about there's multiple paths to commercialization. It doesn't always have to be in that traditional sense. So if I look at all the things I had to learn about leadership and tenacity and knowledge, where I learned, self-funding to profit funding to venture funding to angel funding to commercialization paths of building the product, partnering for the product, licensing to the product. That's all the skill sets I had to have in order to be successful as an entrepreneur. And so, what I really found through this whole thing was my skill set. My skill set being idea to innovation. That translation of an idea, whether it's mine or somebody else's, but taking an idea without execution has no value. It's a hobby. And I'm not in the hobby business. My entire career has been taking ideas, whether they're mine or somebody else's, and turning those into innovations. And that's what really gets me excited. Ideas to innovations. And so hopefully you found this interesting, gives you a little background and context. You're probably sitting there going, okay, this is great, Phil. You've given us a little bit of a roadmap of your career. What does this mean for me? How do I apply this? What I would actually encourage you to do is think about attending a disruptive ideation workshop. Bring it into your organization. But this is teaching this ideas to innovation. How do you take an idea and turn it into an award-winning, game-changing, totally transform, whether it be you, maybe you've got a raw idea and you want to turn that into a real product. You're part of a team or you're part of an organization, and you're looking to create innovations that are disruptive. That's what this workshop is all about. And so you can hop on over to disruptiveideation.com. You can find out more information. Sometimes I teach those courses, but it's my workshop, and I've trained trainers. They teach that workshop. But feel free. We can, if you want, we can get on the phone. We can chit chat about it, whatever makes sense. If you want to get in touch with me, drop me an email. You can do that over at phil@killerinnovations.com. Also, read the blog over at philmckinney.com. I do periodic just writings about leadership and innovation ethics and a variety of different topics. But you can also find the show notes for today's show and the entire back catalog going back almost 16 years now over at killerinnovations.com. If you want to get connected, I put out a weekly email which kind of summarizes the leading thinking of the week around innovation. So text the word innovation to 44222, or you can send an email to innovation@killerinnovations.com. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's show. We're coming up on the end of the calendar year. We've got some exciting announcements for the first shows in January, so you're not going to want to miss that. So subscribe. And with that, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.